Hi, my name is Megan Doherty, and this is my thesis defense at Southern Illinois University. My study was titled, The Investigation of Cross-Modal Transfer Across Visual and Tactile Sensory Modalities in a Multiple Baseline Design. To begin, I'd first like to discuss autism spectrum disorder. This is a diagnosis characterized by its deficits and its excessive behaviors. So some of the deficits include difficulty making or sustaining eye contact, uttering words at a developmentally appropriate age, and then also creating abstract thoughts. Some of the excessive behaviors include rocking back and forth, emitting repetitive vocalizations, and then also obsessing over anxiety-provoking situations. In a recent study in 2014-2015, found that this diagnosis has actually been steadily increasing, where at 1 in every 45 children are actually diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. So this increasing prevalence means that more children require behavioral services. Also, caretakers, teachers, and practitioners need the most effective technologies that are available. And then interventions must be fairly easy to implement since so many individuals are working with these kids. So one of the most effective technologies out there for using behavior therapy with kids includes relational frame theory, otherwise known as RFT. This is a theory of language. This theory states that verbal behavior is learned through a combination of rule-governed behavior, derived relational responding, and applied behavior analysis. To break RFT down into its most simplest part is to teach an individual about reflexivity. So in reflexivity, you train that one stimulus A is completely identical to its counterpart A, which is the exact same stimulus. So A is A, and then the learner derives that A is also the same as A. Seems pretty simple, but for kids with disabilities, it can be pretty difficult. So with a more visual example, if you show a picture of a ball, you teach the learner that the ball is the same as a ball, and then the learner derives that this ball is the same as this picture of the ball. So then next is symmetry, where it gets a little bit more interesting. So stimulus A is then taught that it's the same as stimulus B, which is a completely different stimulus. And then the learner derives that B must be the same as A. So with the ball example, you show the picture of the ball, and that is the same as uttering the word ball. So then when the learner hears the word ball, they derive that that must be the same as the picture of the ball. So finally, there's transitivity, which gets a little bit more complicated. First, we need to teach the learner that B is the same as C, so using the same thing as symmetry, what I just explained, and then the learner will derive that C is the same as B as well. And after that, transitivity comes into place where the learner derives that C is the same as A, and A is the same as C. Using the ball example, so the picture of the ball is the same as uttering the word ball. Uttering the word ball is then the same as the four letters B-A-L-L, and then those letters are also derived to be the same as the picture of the ball, and the picture of the ball is derived to be the same as the letters B-A-L-L. With RFT, it gets really interesting because individuals learn a whole lot of things through these theories. So children are able to identify same and different, comparison, hierarchical relations, perspective taking. They understand how language affects the world around them. These individuals are also able to learn how to break the relations of feelings, ideas, and worries related to anxiety. And then they're also able to learn how to create new and healthy relations between those same events. So the list could go on for a while. Now, RFT can be super complicated, but thankfully Dr. Dixon created a curriculum titled PEAK, Promoting the Emergence of Advanced Knowledge. And this incorporates a lot of the RFT theories and makes them seem not so complicated. And it was created to provide caregivers, teachers, and practitioners with easy-to-implement procedures. And so they don't really need a thorough understanding of behavior analysis. It was really designed to be for people who don't really understand it so much to be able to still implement it consistently. This was comprised of 4 different modules, so direct training, generalization, equivalence, and transformation. The equivalence module is what I specifically used for my study. Now, before I go on and discuss my study in particular, I want to just discuss one more concept that's super complex. So when you teach that 2 stimuli are related and you use one sensory mode, then that is referred to as unimodal relational training. When you use 2 or more stimuli and say that these are related, and you use 2 or more senses, this is called cross-modal relational training. When stimuli are directly taught to be related and multiple senses are used, this is cross-modal training, so you're directly training that things are related. However, when stimuli are directly taught to be related with one sense mode, and the person has to derive that another relation exists with another sense mode, this is referred to as cross-modal transfer, which is what I utilized in my study. Cross-modal is a very interesting idea. It's a fairly new way to understand how children make sense of the world around them at very young ages. So, for example, like all the objects in their environment, such as toys, they're able to kind of understand all these objects better. And a study in 1990 found that training 2 sensory modalities at the same exact time is shown to be much faster than teaching one sense at a time. So this can be cost-effective and time-efficient, which is also what I used in my study. So the present study, here it is, finally. So I investigated the derived relational responding and the process of cross-modal transfer of reflexivity for 2 under-researched sensory modalities, visual and tactile. With one sense mode, I did give training for visual, but for the other sense mode, I did not give training, and that was for tactile. So we just monitored the emergence of the skill via probes, and we utilized the procedures from the PEAK-E module, like I said earlier. Getting into the method, so my participants were 2 elementary-aged boys diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. The 2 prerequisites in order to participate included 1, they needed to be able to respond to questions with yes or no. I didn't expect them to say everything consistently or correctly all the time, but they at least had to know that yes and no could be answers to questions. And then they also had to be able to distinguish, or could not distinguish reflexivity. So I did not want their reflexivity scores on their pre-assessments to be 100% or 12 out of 12. For participant 1, which is Joe, he was a 6-year-old male. He was familiar with the PEAK D, T, G, and E modules prior to his study. And his pre-assessment score was 17 out of 48, and his reflexivity score more specifically was 7 out of 12. The reinforcers utilized throughout the study for him were verbal praise, toys, the iPad, and just talking with his behavior therapist. His reinforcement schedule was about 2-minute breaks after completing 2 trial blocks, which was approximately every 5 minutes. He completed his participation for this study within 6 90-minute sessions. Moving on to the second participant, Ben. He was a 7-year-old male. He was familiar with the PEAK DT and G modules prior to the study. His pre-assessment score was 4 out of 48, and all 4 of those points came from the reflexivity portion. His reinforcers included verbal praise and 1-minute breaks to play with toys after every 2 completed trial blocks. And his participation was completed within 1 30-minute session. The materials utilized for my study included 2 PEAK-E programs, 2B and 3C, and also the data sheets that were provided in the PEAK-E module. We also utilized a box or a laptop screen to hide the stimuli between the researchers and the participants. And then 3 stimuli were utilized for each participant. For Joe, that included a small rubber ball, baby's blanket, and a toy tractor. And then for Ben, that included a spiky ball, some Play-Doh, and then a toy monster truck. This is just a program description for program 2B, which was the visual reflexivity program. And then this is the program description for program 3C, which was for tactile matching. Moving on to the dependent variable. So the DV for this study were correct independent responses for both of the PEAK-E programs 2B and 3C. A correct response was defined as receiving 10 out of 10 possible points for 1 trial. There were 6 trials that made up 1 trial block, so there were a total of 60 possible points in a trial block. We took whatever they had independent as their independent scores, divided that by 60, multiplied by 100, and got a percentage. And those are the percentages that we used in the graphs later on. The design for the study was a multiple baseline design across participants. We utilized the 2 different programs. So for program 2B, that had actually 2 phases, baseline and training. And then program 3C had 1 phase, which was just testing and probing throughout. The master criterion was set as 2 different criterion that participants needed to meet both in order to be considered mastered skills. So for the first, they needed 3 consecutive trial blocks of program 2B with independent peak scores of 100%. And then they also needed 2 probes of program 3C with independent peak scores of 100%. The procedure began with baseline and testing. So the researcher would present an item similar to something like this, where they say, look at this, and show a tractor. Then after the participant looks, they wait about 3 seconds to either switch out stimuli or use the same stimulus. and say, look at this, is this the same as what I just showed you? And then the participant typically said yes or no. If they were correct during baseline, the researcher just circled 10 and said nothing. If they were incorrect, the researcher again said nothing and circled 0. So this process continued during baseline. For program 3C, it was really similar to 2B's baseline. The only difference is that they were touching objects as opposed to looking at them. So the trial was initiated by the researcher stating, feel what's in this box, or feel this item. And all 3 stimuli were still utilized for this program. During training for program 2B, the researchers could finally deliver the corrective feedback and praise. So it would go something like, look at this, they'd show a tractor, then they'd take it away, they'd wait about 3 seconds, and they'd say, look at this, is this the same as what I just showed you? And then the participant would say yes, the researcher would say, great job, that's awesome, that was the same. However, if they showed a tractor and then a ball, and the participant said, yes, that was the same, the researcher would use prompting strategies. So they would say stuff like, try again, is this really the same? And the participant would have to eventually have the correct response. After a correct response was emitted, again, the researcher would deliver praise and feedback. So during training, participants were correct, they received a 10. If their response was incorrect, prompting procedures were utilized. They could either get an 8, a 4, or a 2. However, if the participant completely refused to respond at all, they received a 0. Moving on to the results, we'll start with participant 1, Joe, who's the top portion of this graph. His baseline consisted of 4 trial blocks of 2B and 1 trial block of 3C. You can see that the closed data points are 2B and the open circles are 3C. Those were just the probes. For the training process, Joe participated in 9 trial blocks of 2B before he finally reached 100% correct response independence for visual reflexivity, and he participated in 8 trial blocks of 2B before he received 100% for tactile reflexivity. So he actually reached 100% for tactile before he reached 100 for visual. And then his mastery criterion, he mastered program 3C after 20 trials in this study and mastered 2B after 35 trials in this study. Moving on to participant 2, Ben. He participated in 6 trial blocks of 2B and 2 trial blocks of 3C. For training, he participated in 1 trial block of 2B before he received 100% correct response independence for visual reflexivity. And then he participated in 6 trial blocks of 2B where it was trained before he reached 100% correct response independence for tactile reflexivity. For mastery, he received mastery after 15 trials for 2B, and then after 20 trials total in the study, he also mastered program 3C. Moving on to the discussion then. So the present study results show that the intervention was effective. It taught reflexive relation for both visual and tactile sensory modalities. The participants were able to derive relations for tactile reflexivity. We observed the cross-modal transfer occur, and then it also replicated previous research. So extending the literature that I expanded upon in my introduction, it was quicker to train 2 senses as opposed to 1 in my study as it was with Green in 1990. We also utilized under-researched sensory pairs, visual and tactile, with cross-modal transfer. And then finally, learners derived the reflexive relations following the training of just 1 relation, which is what was found in previous studies as well. So some limitations to my study: we utilized the same 3 stimuli for both programs. While it's believed to be no formal similarity between seeing and touching different items, we're kind of unsure how much the participants could have noticed with the stimuli and how they were arranged in the room. Another limitation is that we used familiar stimuli to the learner's environment, so we literally picked up items from that learner's environment, from their therapy rooms or classroom, and we brought them to the study with us. So we don't know how much they actually engaged with those items prior to the study. And then finally, the testing effects. Joe saw the same stimuli for 36 trial blocks, so with the frequent exposure to the same 3 stimuli, there's possible testing effects that could have explained our results. Finally, some future directions could include looking at the hearing impaired or visually impaired and just seeing if maybe since they lack 1 sense, if it's easier or maybe even harder for the cross-modal transfer to occur. And then next, we should maybe investigate how many senses are actually needed to be trained in order for multiple senses to be derived, which could also include which 2 senses can be trained together the quickest. So I encourage you all to continue the discussion. If science can better explain how our senses work, maybe we can then understand the world around us a little bit better, and then in turn teach our youth more efficiently and effectively. Thank you.